Kia ora, and welcome back to the Leadership Lounge, a space for you to get a boost, a refresh, and for healthcare leaders to just take that different perspective, some fresh thinking on your work. I'm Katie, and I'm your host, and with a background of 30 years of working in healthcare, I help you manage the demands and the complexities of your work so that you can feel excited and hopeful about the work that you do. First up this week is a confession about a bit of a hiccup. Now, if you recall, or if you've listened to the very first episode of the Leadership Lounge, I said there had been a number of barriers to me getting a podcast up and going, and one of those was the technical kind of elements, and I had stripped it back to the simplest. I'd worked out my little plan, and it all been going well, all kind of been working. I've simplified it to the fact that I host on Squarespace, which is where my website and my blog is. So that was an easy fix. It wasn't another piece of software. And the magic that sits behind these things that I don't need to know or don't understand about means that it gets magically posted to Apple. And I created a thing on Spotify with the same feed, and that's magically been updated every week until last week. The podcast appeared to arrive on Apple, but nowhere else. Now I have no idea. I still haven't cracked this problem. And so apologies if you normally listen on Spotify. You can always catch the episodes and listen to it on the actual website, so that's cool. But I'm still working this out. So I thought I'd just start with explaining that the whole week's things and the different things I'm trying means episodes appear and disappear, and who knows what that actually looks like and if you actually care about any of that stuff. But I felt it needed to be some sort of context for it. But it also made me think about the top tips I have for problem solving, and I think the top thing that has been coming out this last week while I've been trying to work it out is hold it lightly. You know what? It's a podcast. It's going to get worked out. It's okay. Hold it lightly. And then I think I was remembering, and the reason why hold it lightly was so front of mind for me was there have been times where I've made mistakes and got things wrong with the email in particular, and I have rushed to fix it. And so this rushing to overcorrect, particularly when you're in a state of panic or that realization when you go, oh no, I've just made that mistake, and you rush in to fix it, can make matters worse. I've overcorrected and it's not fallen out in the way I've wanted to, and then you end up having to spend twice as long doing it if I had just held it lightly, taken a moment, considered the various different things, put it into perspective. So reacting in that state of panic, not helpful. So be curious. That's what helps you hold it in that hold it lightly space. And try again. Just because something's gone wrong once doesn't mean to say it's going to go wrong the second time. So don't give up. Oh, I'm playing around with the microphone, not helpful. And so don't give up. Try again. But there is also this line between how many times do you try doing the same thing and expecting a different answer. So if you're not changing any of the conditions, if you're doing exactly the same thing 5-10 times later and you're magically thinking it's going to just whoosh change, yet maybe not. So yes, there's something about trying again, but there is also that line between keeping on doing the same thing and expecting a different result is not going to get you progress. Ask for help is my other top tip. I've asked several people for help on this, and they've given me little bits of advice that I've gone in and tried and done this and then done that. We haven't got there yet. So growth mindset comes into it. I keep saying haven't fixed it yet. That's coming out really naturally. So I'm feeling really good about this. Now, the funny thing is I'm recording this now. I'm going to post it again and hopefully it's all going to land properly. I have no idea if it is. So the irony of me explaining this problem when you might not even be able to listen to this because the problem is still going to exist, it's going to be quite funny. However, I'm now digressing and overthinking. So there's been a problem. The episodes might look all over the place. If you feel like you're missing something, check out the website. That's where it will be. And I will get back to holding it lightly and working it out by trying something new and keeping at it, not giving in. And we'll see what happens to the podcast this week. However, so there we are. Far too long an explanation after all that. Okay, where am I? Take a breath. So this week, what I wanted to share about with you was this idea, and it does correlate probably to this mistakes idea and fixing things, is how do you sustain yourself? How, when things keep going wrong, you just keep going. How do you do that? If we think about healthcare leadership right now, it's everything from the day-to-day to the massive big issues that suddenly drop into your lap at the last minute and you have to now change tack, change direction, communicate things differently. How do you just keep going day after day when it can feel like a slog? And there's no denying that if you read things, wherever you're reading things, if you're just sharing things on Facebook, if you're reading in the news, whatever it is, there's this no denying this sense of exhaustion and burnout in the healthcare world, and this general sense of being in survival mode, that it's all just about surviving until. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I had an incredible conversation with a young leader I was just starting some coaching conversations and starting a coaching engagement with. And we were talking about what was she going to need to be successful in her role. She sat there and she said, well, first up, it's about how I'm going to sustain this, because I need to be able to feel good and thrive in my work and manage that alongside my young family, because if I can't do that, I'm going to be no good to anyone. So first up, it's how I sustain it. She then talked about her people, and she then talked about, the people that she's serving, the people that report to her and the people that she has to work with. And the third thing on her list was the stuff that she has to do. So that was her list. That was the how do I sustain this? That was number one. That was at the top. And quite instinctively, and I was delighted, and I'm so excited that I'm going to be getting to work with her, and that wisdom that she's already grounded in, that if I can't thrive in this role, then I'm going to be no good to anyone. I need the time to work that out so that I can have the impact and the success that I want. And so when we think about that idea of how do we thrive, how do we shift from survival, there is a heap out there, right? This is a hot topic. And I don't want to do any of those things a disservice. And I don't want to try and scrush everything into one podcast, because there's a lot out there. There's a lot about finding what works for you. But there's a couple of things I wanted to mention. And one idea that has resonated with a number of healthcare leaders when I've been in conversation and when I've seen it presented is this idea of an opposite world. And that's just come from research by Nick Petrie. And I'm going to be exploring that and sharing a lot of resources, because it's one of those things you need a few pictures and stuff around. So I'm going to be sharing more about that in the email coming up this week. So if you don't want to miss out on that, you sign up at katiequinney.com/subscribe, or head over to the website. There's a freebie thing you can download, and that gets you onto the email list as well. And I'll be putting the links in the show notes. So there's lots about this opposite world, and that's quite exciting research that's going on. But I guess in the podcast, in just talking to you, I wanted to share the basis when I start having this conversation with people. And it's this idea of noticing where you're at. Because you've got to know where you're at before you know what you're going to do about it. And you can suddenly run yourself into the ground and unable to get up and wonder how on earth you got there. Nick Petrie in his work talks about this idea that we're asleep from the neck down, and that one of the first steps is to wake up and notice how we are in our bodies, how we are in our minds, what's going on for us. So this idea of noticing. And I want to encourage you or ask you, how do you know? What is the way or the routine or the way that you check in with yourself? Now, I think I've shared, and if you've read any of my work, you'll know my husband had a diagnosis of cancer a couple of years ago, and he's been through treatment. He's had chemo and radiation. He's still on some ongoing treatment, and he's in pain most days, to be fair. But some days it's worse than others. And we very early learned this kind of scoring system. Out of 10, where are you at today? And so you could quantify it a little bit, and that could give him some ideas about how hard he pushed himself or what else he needed to do to restore himself. But it was this idea and this kind of frame. So we just used a really simple out of 10 score and just got really clear on it. He kind of quantifies it into mental and is sort of emotional and then physical. And they're two different kind of scoring for him. So there's that. Another way you can think about it is kind of like a battery. You know, those images of the battery, it's fully charged, it's half charged, it's completely empty. Same thing that your phone gets, you know, what's your percentage right now? Brené Brown talks about, she's got this fabulous thing, and I'll put the link to the blog post that I've written about it, is this idea about a gap plan. She talks about it in a relationship as a family and as a husband and wife. You know, she kind of tries to myth bust this idea that a relationship is all 50-50 and that it actually isn't. And it's about turning up and go, I'm at 60% today and we've got this and this to get done. And the other person will go, oh no, and I'm only at 10% today. How are we going to make that gap? What's our gap? If we've got to provide 100% for our relationship and our family or the work that we're doing, how are we going to do that? What needs to change? What needs to shift? What can we do for each other? So there's this, you could give it a percentage. When I'm doing a presentation and asking people to check in at the start of a meeting, I'll often use one of those silly image scales, you know, various different rubber ducks in different formats of being fallen over or tense or llamas or, you know, that type of funny image. That really doesn't work via podcast. You definitely need to see the image. But it's just this space of going, how am I actually feeling? Because you can't do anything unless you know. Well, you can. You just end up running yourself into the ground without noticing. But once you can kind of give yourself that little bit of a clue as to where you're at, then you've got options. Now, my diary I use, and I'll do a link to this one actually because it's an absolute phenomenal diary that I use, a daily planner, and it has a score for my energy levels both in the morning and the evening, and it's just a score of 1 to 5, and I just get to ring it, and it's really interesting, and I make little notes about what was going on there, so I can start to notice when the score is going down and notice what brings the score up. So I'm starting to then see options and plans about what works, what doesn't work. It can give you, like I say, it's giving you this space for options. It means you can stop and step outside of yourself for a little bit and go, well, if I'm actually only a 1 out of 5, what do I need to do to get to a 2? What do I need to do to get to a 3? And why have I been at a 1 all week? What's going on there? You can start to get curious in this space. So that was really my main thing I wanted to share today, that yes, this idea of sustaining, moving from survival to thriving, getting through the days, keeping on going when there is so much going on. It's a big topic. There's a lot of work out there. There's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of writing out there. All of these topics. Burnout is a big issue right now, and so there's a lot out there. I'm going to be sharing a few more things in the email, this idea of opposite world, one of the really exciting things to how to be in that state on a sustained level without looking like you're, losing the ability to kind of keep functioning. So Opposite World from Nick Petrie, really going to be interesting. I'll share some more about that. But that knowing where you're at is your first step. That you've got to notice where you are, recognize what's going on for you, and from there you can start to make a plan and make decisions. Now, if you're eager to sort of jump in and get going on and what do I do then? What do I do then? I need to know. I'm at a 2. What do I do? There are a lot of ideas out there. I've got a lot of things on the blog, for instance, around looking after yourself. The you part and the sustaining you part is a big part of the work that I share and the work that I do with people. So there's a lot of information there. And really, if there's anything else that you do want some ideas on, please flick me a message or an email. And I'd love to be able to explore this more into the different, either the email or the podcast. So there we are this week. Let's see if my new idea works in terms of sharing the podcast and where it ends up. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens there and what I'm going to do next if it doesn't. And thank you again for listening. I'm Katie, and I will be back next week for another episode of The Leadership Lounge. Take care and have fun.